Yeah?
You're on.
Well, thank you, Mo. Hello, everybody. As with Mo, I can't say it's great to be here and to see you because I wish that we were here to be marking the closure of Guantanamo. 4 years ago when President Obama came to office and issued that executive order that I'm sure we all remember promising to close Guantanamo within a year, that was absolutely the right thing to do. Since then, the prisoners at Guantanamo have sadly been failed by the Obama administration, by the United States Congress, by the United States courts, by the majority of the mainstream media in the United States, and by the American people. That sadly is the truth. And when you look at what that means, what does it mean for the people in Guantanamo that these failures have taken place? The most important fact that I think we all need to be aware of on this day, as Mo alluded to, is that over half of the prisoners in Guantanamo have been cleared for release from that prison by a very sober and responsible group of government officials and lawyers from all the government departments and the intelligence agencies, in a report that was issued 3 years ago. So these are decisions that in some cases were made nearly 4 years ago. That, as Mo very, very well put it, these are not people who are needed to be held because they pose a security risk or because they have ongoing intelligence value to the United States. And yet they have not been released. The United States went through a very high-level process of saying to these men, we don't want to hold you anymore, and then didn't release them. Now, in about half of these cases, these men were previously cleared for release by military review boards under the Bush administration. In some of the cases, and you may not know this, in some of the cases, these men were cleared as long ago as 2004, and yet they continue to be held. Some of them were cleared in 2006, some of them in 2007 by these military review boards. In September, one man who was first told in 2004 that he was going to be released, and I've seen the paperwork from the United States government that recommended him for release in December 2006 at the very latest, died at Guantanamo, under circumstances which have been described as him committing suicide, which may or may not be wrong. But it was nearly 6 years after he was officially told that he should be leaving the prison, and he was still there. He was one of the Yemenis that Mo mentioned, and that the Yemenis are not allowed to be released because the United States government has decided that all Yemenis constitute a terrorist threat, even the Yemenis that they themselves have cleared for release from Guantanamo. So the point I want to make to everyone in this room, and everyone who I hope is going to be able to watch this or is watching this, is that just think about what it means to be the government of the United States and to clear people for release from Guantanamo and then not to release them. And compare that to some dreadful totalitarian regime that puts people in prison and throws away the key and says, that's the end of it. I'm just putting you in the cell and throwing away the key. You're going to rot here for the rest of your life. That is more honest than doing that, but saying, actually, we had a review process, and we said we're going to release you, but now we're not actually going to release you. That's more cruel than a dictatorship. And until those men are released, that will be the situation. Now, this apparently is not a great source of shame to many people, and I don't understand why that is. If we were honestly saying we're just going to indefinitely detain these guys and that's the end of the story, it would be a different matter. We would be attacking this from a different point of view. But we're struggling to mobilize people to be outraged about the fact that men are still held who the government said would be released. Now, we know that one of the stumbling blocks in this is Congress, and it's absolutely clear that Congress has been a major stumbling block in the president being able to do anything. Congress has imposed onerous restrictions. That's how one of the Obama administration officials has described it. Onerous restrictions on the release of prisoners. Refusing to allow prisoners to be released to countries that they regard as dangerous, which is pretty much everywhere on earth. Refusing to allow prisoners to be released to any country where they allege that a single prisoner has engaged in recidivism, returning to the battlefield, something that has been the subject of a lot of black propaganda over the years as reports, unsubstantiated reports, continue to emerge to claim that a significant number of prisoners have returned to the battlefield. And Peter, actually, and the New America Foundation have done a lot of research over the years to debunk these claims. But I think if you were to do a Google search, you would find that 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 prisoners from Guantanamo have returned to the battlefield and are actively engaged in terrorist hostilities, which is a wild, wild exaggeration and black propaganda produced by people whose intention is to keep Guantanamo open. People who not only like the fact that Guantanamo is a place of indefinite detention without charge or trial, but that they want that to carry on. There are many people with power and responsibility in this country who would like to add new people to this population. They like the idea of holding people without any accountability for the rest of their lives. So, it's a terrible situation that we're in, but if we are to believe that the President of the United States is somehow powerless, I think we're rather underestimating the role of the Commander-in-Chief. There are ways in which President Obama can at least argue with Congress. We haven't had an argument framed of the necessities for closing Guantanamo, not just on the long-standing basis that it is damaging abroad to be having a place like this open, that it continues to be damaging, but that it's so deeply insulting to the values that Americans hold. And we need to persuade President Obama that it is not enough for him not to be revisiting his promise and trying to fulfill it because it's proved to be politically difficult. It's his second term. Now, the wisdom in the United States is that you don't let somebody have more than 2 terms as president. And the United Kingdom, we've run into all kinds of trouble when we've let prime ministers have a 3rd term. Really, they're all barking mad by the end of 2 if they're not already. But President Obama has an eye on his legacy now, as Mo mentioned. He has an eye on his legacy. He knows that what happens in the 2nd term will decide how he is viewed by history. And these guys, all of these people in important positions want the history books to record that they were good people. Bush, Cheney, and Rumsfeld still want the history books to say a terrible event happened and these people took a robust approach that was necessary. And with the help of people like Catherine Bigelow, I think they presume that they're going to rewrite the rules on torture, as they got John Yoo to do, to say that actually it was okay, and it was part of this robust approach that was so necessary. But President Obama knows that he will be judged on what happens over the next 4 years. And I really don't think, fundamentally, that he wants to be known as the man who promised to close Guantanamo, but then didn't do it because it was politically inconvenient. That, I would say very clearly, is what the history books are going to say. So there are people within the administration, who know that this indefinite detention program is more a legacy of the Bush administration than something that they constructed themselves. This is not to say that the administration's hands are clean, because as Mo was explaining, this is an administration that has preferred to kill people by drones rather than deal with the messy problems of detention that the Bush administration created. So it's a kind of legacy, but it has become something that he completely owns now. So in whatever ways we can, we need to reach out to the administration to say this is a difficult issue, but it's not something that we can't all deal with. We have to first of all be saying, in whatever way we're doing it, in our conversations with our friends and our family and the people that we meet, in whatever way we can campaign, those of us who write about things, to keep saying this is not a position that the United States can be in. That 11 years after this dreadful experiment in torture and indefinite detention opened, we are still in a position, we're in a worse position, where all 3 branches of the United States government have failed these men, and we are holding people that we said we wanted to release. We are holding men that we said we wanted to release 8 years ago, 6 years ago, 5 years ago, 3 years ago. We have to release these people. And one of the issues that Mo also talked about, Mo talked about everything that we need to talk about, it seems, is the Yemenis. And is the problem that because of this man, Umar Farouk Abdul Muttalab, who tried to blow up a bomb in his underwear on a flight into the US on Christmas Day in 2009, from that moment on there was a ban on releasing the cleared Yemenis in Guantanamo, as though they had something to do with it, as though all Yemenis are terrorist suspects. So you clear somebody on the one hand and then say, but actually I still regard them as a threat. Please make your mind up. The issue, though, is that these are not significant people. It's been too easy, as a result of saying we can't release them because they're all dangerous, even though we cleared them. to ramp up the significance. We've had this exaggeration throughout Guantanamo's history. These are not significant people in any manner. Otherwise, they would never have been cleared for release by the task force. So we need to focus on that issue, not on the hysteria that developed afterwards, but on the fact that we said to these Yemeni men, you can go home, and then we said to them, oh, hang on, no, you can't, because you're from Yemen, and all people from Yemen are dubious. That's a horrible message to be sending out to the people of Yemen, and it's completely unjust for these men. The other issue is that there are about 30 prisoners from countries, mostly from countries where it's not safe for them to be returned because their government would treat them at least as badly as the United States has treated them for the past 11 years, or worse. There are still a few prisoners in Guantanamo, the Uyghurs, who are Muslims from a province in China who are oppressed by the Chinese government. There are Syrians in Guantanamo who've been cleared for release. There are Tunisians in Guantanamo who've been cleared for release and still held. I don't actually understand why they're still held, because they were all opponents of the dictator Ben Ali, who has been deposed. So that's one issue that I think needs to be really looked at, is why specific people are still held. And the one that many of us have been campaigning on, not just for this year, but for many, many years, is Shaka Arma, who is the last British resident in Guantanamo. And the United States government has very clearly said they want to release him. He's on a list of 55 prisoners that the Department of Justice released as part of a court case in September. The first time that the United States government publicly said the names and identities of 55 of these 86 cleared prisoners. And he's on that list. So we have it printed that the United States government doesn't want to hold him. We have from the British government the statements over the years that they want him back to be reunited with his British wife and his 4 British children, and yet he is still held. Now those of us who've been studying this case think that it's because he knows too much. He's a very eloquent man. He has always fought for the rights of the prisoners. He knows a lot of the dark stories of Guantanamo and the prisons in Afghanistan that, maybe he knows stories that none of us have ever heard. He will be an embarrassment to both the governments if he's ever released. But unfortunately, he's part of this whole situation where we've reached a point where he's a good example of how neither government actually wants him to be released because it will be embarrassing. So let's delay it. And why can they delay it? Well, they can delay it because nobody cares enough. It's the reason that President Obama has been able to punt his responsibilities and just blame Congress, because people don't care enough. So the only message I can leave you with is to return yet again to how I started, really, to say, is it acceptable? Is it at all acceptable that you clear people for release and then don't release them, and you do that for so many years? And if we can push on that one and make that perhaps our biggest message that we need to send to the administration and to Congress, then maybe when we meet again in a year's time, we will at least have had some progress. So thank you.